When did you first meet Francis Bacon?
I suppose it would have been about 1819, and it's likely to have been in the Marlborough Gallery. I used to work just around the corner from there for a couple of years, and I used to go there some lunchtimes. I had a couple of people who worked there I used to go out to lunch with, and I think I must have first seen him in the gallery, probably introduced by Miss Beston, I'd imagine. And Miss Beston was extraordinary, and Francis quite obviously loved her, and I think vice versa. They felt like a team, a unit. I think by that time Miss Beston looked after my father a bit, but I think her energy basically went into making sure that Francis was happy. And so, yeah, no, they did. They felt like a gang, the two of them. He wasn't run-of-the-mill. He was quite obviously a bit special. I mean, I knew who he was and what he did, but apart from that, I mean, he did look rather extraordinary, and his whole demeanour was unique, I think. He probably asked after my father. I'm not sure. My father keeps his cards very close to his chest. I'm not sure how close they were at this point. I'm not sure whether there had been as severe a falling out as there had been with Lucian, but my father remained friends with Lucian all his life. And so I didn't get the impression that they were terrifically close, but I didn't either get the impression that there was any resentment or rancour. I mean, it's not a memory, but I sort of feel that Francis probably asked how Frank was and so on. So, yeah. I mean, I think I saw him around. I probably used to spend a bit too much time drinking in Soho, and I would see him occasionally in the French, maybe the Coach and Horses. I knew Bruce Bernard quite well, and I think probably Bruce used to sort of include me in a very generous way in his conversations, and I think probably we first had maybe the only time we had a conversation where it was sort of pretty much talking as equals rather than the son of my father would be through Bruce and in the French. And it was sort of a nodding acquaintance, as so many were in those days in the French. If you turned up enough, you became a recognised face. And I used to turn up maybe a bit too much, as they say. It's only one conversation I really remember, and it's a moral that I carry with me today. We were talking, I don't know if you know of Dan Farson, but he was, I mean, in the 50s, really, he was a television personality, very well known. And he wrote a book called Soho in the 50s. And he was marvellous, lively, engaging company, but in my experience, and I don't think I'm alone in this, he was one of those people where that one sip of one drink would take him over the edge, and he would become difficult, rancorous, aggressive, bombastic. And I remember on one occasion, myself and Francis were talking to Dan in the French, and this happened. And it really was, my memory says that I'm not overstating it. It was just one sip, and he went from being lovely to being completely impossible. And he sort of went off to bother someone else. And I said to Francis, why does he do it? He must know that he does it. And Francis was quiet a little while and said, I'm not going to try the impression, said, yes, but at least he's a giver, not a taker. He said, 95% of people, they're vampires socially. They take. But at least he gives. I thought about this a bit after, and I realised that this was true, and I felt the same. And when I next saw him, I said, Francis, I really thought about what you said about Dan Farson the last time, and how wise it was, and I realised in retrospect how much I agreed with it. And he said, oh, what did I say? And I said, you said that, most people are takers socially, and that he was a giver, and you said, that 95% of people were takers. And he said, oh, how idiotic I was. And I said, what do you mean? He said, no, it's 99.99999%. But I think That's the only recollection I have of having a conversation with him, sort of socially. The others were more business-like. There was, I can just go straight into this if that's, I think it must have been through James Birch. I was contacted asking whether I'd be interested in making a film about Francis's show at the Tretyakov Center in Moscow, the first living foreign artist to have an exhibition in Russia under Gorbachev. And I said, of course. And then I remember, I think there were probably a couple of meals with Francis and Miss Beston, maybe one of them with James Birch, I don't think both with James Birch, where we sort of came up with a plan that everyone was happy with for this film. And that, I think both of those meals were in that lovely restaurant, I'm not even sure that it still exists, just off German Street, called Green's, which certainly at that time was Francis's favourite, I understand. And we agreed that it should be an omnibus, and I sort of got things underway at the BBC. And I think after Francis had decided to do it, most of the discussion was about food in Russia and where one could get the best kind of food. And I know Bruce, who was going for the opening, had done a fair amount of research and decided that a particular Georgian restaurant would be the place where everything was made with walnuts. And Francis I must have told him that I'd been to Greece a few times or something. He was very interested in how much I knew of the Cyrillic alphabet and how much I might be able to decipher things once we were in Russia. But anyway, that was all going ahead, and I was sort of organising the crew and getting things organised within the BBC, which then was much more straightforward than it is now. I mean, it just really took the series editor to say, yes, we want it, and then I got on with it. And then I think it was about 3 weeks beforehand, I phoned up just to, sort of make the final plans, at which point I was told, not by Francis, my memory suggests it might have been Miss Beston, that Francis didn't think it was a good idea, and that he was pulling out of the film. That's my only experience. It was a disappointment, obviously, but not a disaster. I mean, I did see Bruce Bernard did a marvellous book of photographs about Francis. I don't know if you know of this, but Bruce had a wonderful eye for a photograph and was very close to Francis and sort of did this thing, I think, with the encouragement and interest of Francis, and put it together. And I saw a sort of mock-up of what was going on. It was the most marvellous picture book, really revealing. And Francis pulled out of that at the last moment as well. I think there was. This is just my instinct, it's not based on any facts. But I think there was something about him which was a bit cantankerous, didn't mind causing a few ripples with friends, maybe especially with friends, I don't know. I mean, I think there are certain people who one feels slightly off balance with. Actually, Esther said in the film of mine about her father that she noticed that people around Lucian seemed to be balancing on one toe. And I know that feeling. I certainly on occasion felt it with Lucian, although not every time, and felt it with Francis as well. You were never really confident of where you stood, I don't think. Yes, nothing was as expected. I think it was almost like a principle of life that one should not do what others expected of you. So no, I don't think I ever felt completely relaxed. But I didn't feel he was, sort of so different that he wasn't part of the race or was outside social discourse or was in any way part of the opposition rather than an ally. I certainly felt as though he was on the right side. And it's easy too when you love someone's work. You can. Not that I have anything specifically to forgive. I don't. As I say, it wasn't enormously painful that the film fell through. But you can forgive people other stuff if they produce great paintings. I loved his work. I mean, I don't know if you know, I didn't see my father for a long time, but I was sort of aware of painting, and I liked my father's work. outside of the relationship with my father at that time. And I liked Francis's work a lot, and Lucian's work. And nothing astonishing. They're all good painters. I mean, the triptych that's in the exhibition in Malaga at the Picasso Museum, I think is fantastic, where it was in the same room as Mike Andrews' picture of teaching his daughter Mel to swim. But when I think of Francis, I think of that Lucian drawing of Francis, where there's it feels very quick, where there's sort of attempts at producing the shape of Francis Bacon's head. And the first is pretty weird, but obviously Lucian realised it's not weird enough, and the second one is even weirder, and no one's got a head that shape, and that's the one that's actually right, and it's just so true. So I'm not sure that my flat could do justice to one of Francis's works, but I'd love a picture of Francis.